So everybody gets what they want later down the line. The world! Not everyone can hear the call of fate, but you are among the first. I'm proud to say this video is sponsored by JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Spirit, a cross-generation JoJo RPG. Players will be able to experience their favorite characters from Part 5 Golden Wind in this upcoming closed beta test. But the game just isn't limited to Part 5. You'll be able to experience Parts 1 through 6 as well, with cross-part character combinations in the full game of Golden Spirit. Golden Spirit stays true to the JoJo style, as the characters and their abilities look like they have been taken from the anime itself. Whether that be Abakio using Moody Blues to help Bruno, Mista using Sex Pistols on Gauntlet with his White Album, or my personal favorite, Giorno evolving Gold Experience to Gold Experience Requiem to defeat Diavolo, putting him through the death loop, with so many more iconic JoJo scenes on the way, with storylines and environments coming from the source material itself to fully honor the franchise. Personally, I want to see how Dio and Jotaro play with their ultimate abilities to stop time and see their iconic bridge fight, and or the clash between Josuke and Kira at the end of Diamond is Unbreakable. If you're looking for a strategic team-based building game with stand-centric combat and a fully immersive 360 field of view, then you're in luck. Find the link in the description or the pinned comment below, sign up and be among the first to experience this cross-gen JoJo RPG. Also, participating in the closed beta test grants multiple in-game rewards at the official launch of the game, so you don't want to miss out. And time resumes. Now the structuring of this video is going to be a bit unique, despite what the title suggests. All 6 of the Stardust Crusaders highballed fighting Pork Pie Hat Kid is just overkill, dog. Just complete and utter obliteration. Given that fact, I'll be placing 2 modifiers on the Stardust Crusaders half, those being 2 teams of 3 and lowballed stats. I'm trying to make this question interesting yet welcoming for everybody, so we're not going to be dealing with town to city level Jotaro here, and simultaneously asking if the other side of the Stardust Crusaders can do it without Jotaro, as the teams will be Jotaro, Joseph, and Kakuin, with the other half being Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy. These teams being literally exactly the same as the Dio's Mansion arc back in Stardust Crusaders. And yes, for anybody asking the question, will you do the whole Crusaders uncapped versus D4C Love Train at any point in the video? Duh. Why the hell wouldn't I? That's the fun part about these videos. I'm a battle junkie. I'm no different than Goku. And when it comes to the Steel Ball run side of things, I will be highballing the verse, giving them building level stats and relativistic to faster than light speeds. So the highest the SBR verse can go. So kind of in a way equaled stats, but they vary. So with the premise set up and the limitations in place, how far do the Stardust Crusaders make it in Steel Ball Run? Walk with me. So instead of doing Jotaro, Joseph, and Kakuin first, because I think a lot of you were expecting that, we're going to do Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy, because you know what? I want to respect my goats. These are some of my favorite characters, aside Jotaro. Now, I have to clarify something. There is a lot of stand users I'm going to be talking about in this video. So for clarity's sake, if I don't mention a stand user in this video against any 2 of these teams, that means that I believe they completely slam them in a number of ways. Either their hack gets countered, or in a combination of anybody on the team, either in a duos or trio scenario, just completely destroy opposing stand user. So if I don't bring them up, just assume they get absolutely crushed by said team. This is totally not going to piss people off. My idea is thorough. So what is Team Polnareff looking like here? Honestly, very well rounded. Polnareff is an up close attacker with blistering speeds, with a little side of defense, who thanks to showings against Jotaro, Avdol, and later characters within Stardust Crusaders, is a massively faster than light monster thanks to him being calced next to Jotaro. However, thanks to the limitations I'm putting on this fight, town level and city level Polnareff gets degraded to a building level character just like the rest of them. Thankfully, Avdol and Iggy are no different, given the fact that most of their scaling actually comes from Polnareff, either through directly defeating Polnareff or being implied to be stronger than Polnareff, even though that might be a joke in Iggy's case. However, though, that might not be a joke given the fact that Avdol says even he struggled to capture Iggy back in New York. And speaking about Avdol and Iggy, let's talk about their stand abilities and hacks, because they are coming in with a lot, even though their abilities are really basic. Avdol is a mid-range to long-range offensive monster, having the ability just to control fire. While basic, it is incredibly deadly, even defeating Polnareff and Jotaro in early Stardust Crusaders. And if the scenario calls for you getting up close to Avdol, yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that. He was able to restrain an early Star Platinum. That's a death sentence. And the cherry on top of all of that is that Avdol is an experienced stand user similar to Polnareff. Swinging over to Iggy, this is where things get very similar, however a tad bit different. Iggy has the ability to control sand with a Fool. However, unlike Avdol, does not use it in an offensive manner but a defensive manner instead. When attacking the Fool, it basically does no damage as the sand around it molds and shapes to your attacks, effectively making your attacks do nothing. And in more dire scenarios can effectively make domes of sand to protect himself or others, primarily using slashes to defend himself as well. When Iggy wants to be tricky, he can eventually use his sand manipulation to such a high degree that he can make clones or vestiges of people's appearances, adding a great deal of confusion to fights. However, it's not just limited to people. He can just kind of sand manipulate anything into the environment, as he can change the color of his sand and the shape of it. So he can kind of more or less blend in or make his allies also blend in with him as well, given the fact that he does this against Vanilla Ice with Polnareff. Taking a step back and looking at Team Polnareff, this team is a well-balanced powerhouse. You have an up-close speed merchant, a mid-range offensive monster, and a defensive tricky dog to round out the team. To kind of glaze the whole team in its entirety, it literally took a character who is a vampire with the ability to just instantly obliterate anything to really provide any greater challenge for them. And even then, despite losing 2 members, they still won. Polnareff #1. So how far does Team Polnareff get in Steel Ball Run? I think really far, and the only stands that are really providing some challenges are some of the greater ones within Steel Ball Run. Obviously, one of the first ones is Mandem and Ringo Road Again. Now, Mandem has the ability to rewind 6 seconds back into the future. In its utilization, it is for Ringo to achieve a perfect battle high in the True Man's world. So while Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy definitely do have the kit and team kit required to beat Ringo, the problem is going to be the rewind constantly. And because of the rewind, I don't think any defensive options can be accessed here through Iggy, because this battle technically, and how it goes in the manga between Gyro and Ringo, ends in one really good hit. So depending on how Polnareff and Avdol do this, they have to effectively kill Mandem and Ringo in one fell swoop for this fight to end, which I think is really possible. It's just going to be this constant rewinding, like I said, that's going to be annoying. This leads us into our next matchup. Now, I struggled putting one of these characters in the list. However, the fact that later on in the video, I'm doing another duo group, I thought I would do the original duo group before the very famous one. That being In a Silent Way and Scary Monsters, their stand users being Soundman and Diego Brando. Now at first, Soundman and Diego have a lot of numbers on their side. Thanks to Scary Monsters, Dinosaur Infection, comboing with In a Silent Way's physical sound effect abilities makes them a very powerful duo who can overwhelm their opponents extremely fast. However, in this case, we have a lot of defense and a lot of offense on Team Polnareff's side. Now, while at first, Team Polnareff will be overwhelmed thanks to Scary Monsters dinosaurs being manipulated by In a Silent Way, this will be ultimately countered by Avdol's ability to hit multiple targets at once with Crossfire Hurricane. So while at first it might be a little bit jank between the two teams, it is ultimately solidified by the fact that Avdol can just kind of reduce the playing field to kind of even. And since Diego doesn't truly help Soundman after a specific loss within the fight itself, this ultimately means it's a 3v1 with Polnareff probably coming into close range, as In a Silent Way can make long range attacks kind of swoosh around him, not effectively hitting him thanks to his stand ability. And while Sandman can keep himself armed during these fights, against Polnareff it basically means nothing. That dagger don't mean nothing to Big Paul. That's a game over for Soundman, unfortunately. And even if I did incorporate Diego and his Scary Monsters more so than the original manga did, I still don't think this would actually be enough to defeat Team Polnareff because of Iggy. Diego in his Velociraptor form has different senses compared to a human, and he kind of acts animalistic. If Iggy's able to set up multiple vestiges of Soundman, this would ultimately confuse the dinosaur and lead to either Iggy and or Avdol in a combo just to finish off the giant Velociraptor. That same strategy could also apply if they are fighting Soundman while Polnareff is fighting Velociraptor Diego Brando. And while Diego Brando in his Velociraptor state can perceive Silver Chariot's attacks thanks to his acute eyesight, that doesn't mean he'd be able to outspeed him in that category. So other than the beginning of this fight being a possible headache given the sheer size of small dinosaurs with sound effects on them making them deadly, I think Team Polnareff does really have this in the bag thanks to Avdol's multiple attacks and Iggy's vestiges. That was kind of disappointing for our first 3v2 in this video. But now we get real team players, Magenta and Wikapipo. Now, unlike the previous two scenarios, which kind of give Team Polnareff a little bit of struggle, but not too much, this one definitely has a killing potential to outright just stop them from progressing any further in Steel Ball Run, mostly due to Wikipepo and his wrecking balls. So unlike Gyro's steel balls that have the ability to infect the environment and the human body, Wikipepo's wrecking balls are specifically made to disorient and physically attack their opponents without a lot of body manipulation. But the body manipulation that is present completely and utterly disorients you to the point where you can't feel one side of your body, that being the left side, leaving you completely vulnerable. This style of fighting is so effective that you could say that Gyro and Johnny might have lost in their original encounter with these two if it wasn't for Gyro's extended knowledge with a spin and then Naples' Royal Guard, something that Team Polnareff is highly lacking in. And don't count out Magenta and 20th Century Boy, as he possesses the ability with his stand to have absolute defense, basically becoming immune to any types of damage. Now, the fight between these two teams is very interesting because of the lack of knowledge on Team Polnareff's side and the hemispherical left side neglect that the Wrecking Balls present for them as well really do give Team Wikipepo the advantage here. Close range stand users to mid-range stand users like Iggy and Polnareff are at a severe disadvantage here, and when being disoriented, this is where Magenta can show up and kind of off guard them with a revolver shot to a very crucial body spot, meaning that the only reliable one on Team Polnareff's side is Avdol, thanks to his long range-ish abilities, because once Magenta starts picking off the disoriented team members, it's going to snowball into something bad really quick. Now note, Polnareff and Iggy aren't defenseless, it's just the fact that they can only see on the right side of their bodies, so there's a lot of trickery and a lot of fuckery that can go on here with Magenta. Now, I also have to say here as well, this also could be like a defense versus defense scenario thing where if Iggy is not affected by the Wrecking Balls immediately, Avdol and Iggy could do some really good pairings against Magenta and Wikipepo with the vestiges and the fire attacks. In their case, I think the optimal strategy would be just getting rid of the Wrecking Balls as fast as possible, so that possibly means Magician's Red just completely incinerating or melting the Wrecking Balls to absolute nothing is the best case for victory. How I kind of see it, it's like 50-50 on both sides, but whoever can snowball their effects faster on the other team ultimately wins here. Also, super personal note, I think by far this is my most favorite fight because it's just so interesting seeing how Team Polnareff would interact with Wikipepo and Magenta in a stand battle-esque scenario, because nobody's ready for the Wrecking Balls at all, because they always become disoriented and they're always like, what the fuck is happening? I can't fight. But since there is a win con for Avdol and Iggy, possibly maybe even Avdol himself, given the fact that his fire is very effective and he only technically needs to focus on Wikipepo for the most part and not Magenta, I think they can move on to the next fight. Now, this next matchup isn't outstatting or out-hacking, it's just if you can outsmart the ability or get around it, which I think Team Polnareff can, that being Axl Rose Civil War. Now, Civil War goes as the following. Once entering Axl Rose's domain, quote unquote, sin and guilt can take a physical form. When interacting with this guilt or sin in physical form, a membrane begins to form on you, crippling you as the literal physical weight of that sin and guilt proceeds to suffocate you to death. Now note, this suffocation varies, as somebody like Hot Pants was near death, while somebody like Gyro took a while to get to that state. And it's not as easy as avoiding this guilt or sin, as the physical manifestations of this sin or guilt will try to interact with you, starting the membrane. So somebody like Polnareff, especially Polnareff, could be affected by this, as he could feel guilty for his sister's death or the possible killings of other stand users back in part 3. This also would apply to Avdol as well, but we don't know his full backstory, so that one's a kind of a maybe. However, Iggy in 2 interpretations of this fight is completely immune. In the layman's interpretation without any religious influence, Iggy don't give a fuck. We've seen throughout all of part 3 and his backstory, Iggy has a very nonchalant attitude about him without feeling any guilt. So if it came to killing Axl Rose in a 1v1 encounter, Axl Rose's second ability where he comes back as a living ghost and then all of his sins are transferred onto X person wouldn't work here because Iggy wouldn't feel any guilt or sin about killing Axl Rose. In the second interpretation, with a little bit of religious influence, Iggy might just be immune to sin itself and guiltiness because he is an animal. In the Bible, it kind of states that the only things that can really feel sin are humans, and Iggy, of course, because of his animal origins, is not capable of sinning. So he would be perfectly fine fighting Axl Rowe in a 1v1. And I don't think in terms of stats, Axl Rowe is even near Pet Shop, so I think Iggy has this in the bag pretty easily. Also, I'd like to add a little thing here at the very end of this section. Even though I don't think these three would figure out water is the weakness to the membranes, we maybe could argue a trial by fire scenario here instead of like your sins being cleansed through a baptism, quote unquote. That's what it's trying to represent within the story itself. Maybe Avdol with Magician's Red can just burn away the membrane, aka the sin, possibly. So who knows? Which leaves us with our last opponent aside D4C Love Train, which we'll do in a separate section. That being Parallel World Diego and The World. Now I'm going to kind of freeball this one. Do we think this team in specific can even defeat regular Dio? Because if they have a chance to defeat regular Dio, that means Diego should be in theory easier because his time stop isn't spammable, nor is he a vampire. And remember, 5 seconds of frozen time is a lot of time for somebody like Diego because he uses his time stop a bit differently, using objects or things in his toolkit to beat his opponents. The only way I see them winning is if Iggy is playing the very heavy defensive game and blending into the environments or just making things up with his sand to confuse Parallel World Diego, with Polnareff and Avdol being somewhere within that sand, completely blindsiding Diego and his world. Somewhat similar to how when Polnareff kind of backstabbed Dio while he was paying attention to JoJo. So kind of something in that scenario. If not, and then Diego's able to kind of pick off Avdol, Iggy, Polnareff, like any one of the three, I think it goes to him because then it's just like, what can you do? Your defense is down, or your mid-range is down, or your up close and personal guy is down. It's like, what do you do there? Because now you have to deal with this 5 seconds of frozen time, and it gets really confusing. So without a plan here, or at least a plan that is made up on the fly, heavily involving Iggy, I just don't see a win here. They're all going to be part of the Donut Club. So aside from one fight, and another fight I haven't mentioned yet, I think Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy get really close to beating all of Steel Ball Run, but just get stopped by, of course, the word wall. However, they possibly do have a win con, but it is extremely difficult to achieve victory with it, given the fact that time stop is busted. So now we move on to our second team, that being Team Jotaro, aka Joseph gets carried, the team. Spoiler warning, there's just going to be a lot of, and then Jotaro won in this segment. This is why I saved it for last, because we're going to like basically speed run through this. Our first opponent, like last time, is Mandem. I always think Mandem is going to be a difficult fight just because of the loop. However, in this case, because of time stop and then just being outright faster than anything that Ringo can actually output, Jotaro wins. He either just activates time stop or just physically beats him through sheer speed alone. Thank you, Jotaro. You made Joseph and Kakyoin literally useless in this fight because you just do everything. Now, our next fight is interesting because I'm only adding it here because I think it makes Joseph useful. Blackmore and his stand catch the rainbow. Now, how this stand works is that Blackmore can become one with the rain / manipulate the rain with his will, being able to travel over large distances with it or making it a shredding tool when fighting other people. A very, very powerful stand in specific circumstances. However, I think Joseph is a direct counter to Blackmore for the most part. Halmoen literally has a specific technique with dealing with water-based situations, that being turquoise blue overdrive. So while Blackmore is in a water-like form by melding with the rain, ultimately leaves him vulnerable for Joseph to exploit his water-like hack. If that doesn't defeat him, the leftovers of that encounter by either Kakyoin or Jotaro just finish him off. God, this is fucking hilarious. Thank God I did this second. Okay, but for realsies though, now we get into a scenario where you just can't brute force your way out of it. We have Sugar Mountain. Now, to clarify something here, the reason why Sugar Mountain didn't show up previous to this in the Team Polnareff section is because of Avdol. Avdol is smart enough to realize not to take things from strange places, advising both Iggy and Polnareff not to do so, even though those two would definitely take it. And even if they did, given Avdol's origins as a man from the Middle East, definitely knows how to get rid of wealth. Yes, I know the Quran and how it works and how you should give to the poor. I'm big brain like that. I'd also have to say here as well, I don't think Iggy would be affected by it because we see in the Guardian tree, it's only people and no animals. So possibly Iggy would be unaffected, potentially. However, in Team Jotaro's case, Joseph isn't listening to either of them if they're smarter than him and is still taking the wealth for himself. While intelligent in terms of fights, just isn't the best of moral character. Given that case, now we enter through a whole arc where Joseph has to get rid of all of his wealth, or anything he accumulates during this fight with Sugar Mountain. So Joseph and crew, I think for the most part, could get rid of all of their wealth before sunset, but it will probably take a little bit of time knowing Joseph's luck. So I do think they can ultimately win here, but I wouldn't say it's a complete guaranteed chance. There's always room for screw up. Just look at the original story. Now our next fight is something I've already talked about, that being Magenta Magenta and Wicca Peepo with the Wrecking Balls and 20th Century Boy. Now I think this fight is still complex and a bit difficult at first, just like within the Team Polnareff section. I do think that Joseph probably gets off guarded by Wicca Peepo, maybe even all of them. However, what really makes it a lot easier for Team Jotaro in this case is, of course, the 20-meter Emerald Splash, or the long distance stuff that Kakyoin can do, plus, you know, Time Stop and Star Platinum just wrecking house once in close proximity. While I think this fight would be interesting at first given the uniqueness of the Wrecking Balls and the fact that Wicca Peepo can't see stands, that disadvantage starts to slowly kick in given the fact that we have a long range monster and a close range demon. Kind of sucks here that 20th Century Boy just gets either completely moved over or can't keep up with the other two in certain scenarios. Still like the fact that they can kind of pose a challenge at first, but not all the way. Which leads us to their most difficult fight by far, Axl Rose Civil War. Now the reason why I think this would be the most difficult is Joseph has the most sin and guilt out of three of them, and there might be at least a little bit of guilt in Jotaro's part, given the fact that Jotaro might feel a bit guilty on how he treats his mother, potentially, question mark, so he could be affected by the membrane just the same as Joseph, which just leaves Kakyoin. However, in my red-haired goat's case, he's lived a pretty solitary life away from people, sadly, so I don't think he'd really have much sin or guilt to be really that affected by Civil War. Like, maybe he can, but I don't think it would be there. And of course, when it comes to a 1v1 between these two in the absolute worst case scenario, I'm going to give it to Kakyoin. However, there is a major exploit here. You can kill Axl Rose outside of the domain, and given the fact that Kakyoin has a long ass range, he could just simply, if he was smart enough, which I think he is, step out of the domain and then just shoot him from very long range. That's it. That's how he beats him. You gotta be kidding, man. That's some bullshit. God damn it. I hate how Team Jotaro's answers to most things are just long range exploit or the world. That's it. Like, I totally understand why in Stardust Crusaders they had to go up against a gimmick character because they just would have cleared anybody else. And don't bring up Parallel World Diego. He gets completely curb stomped by Jotaro and Kakyoin's range together simultaneously. It's just way too much. And even if Kakyoin were to die again, Jotaro already knows the effective countermeasures to beat Time Stop. To beat Time Stop, you just use another Time Stop. Plus, he still has Joseph there to help him out. It's just a worse mirror match. After all of that being said, we finally come into the D4C Love Train section of the video. Now, D4C Love Train's abilities can be described as the following. While D4C and Funny Valentine are within the light barrier of Love Train, they are effectively invulnerable, as all calamity or misfortune will be redirected somewhere else in the world or possibly in the future. Below that is regular D4C's abilities, which are nothing to scoff at. When folded into any two objects, literally any two objects, Funny Valentine can enter a parallel world. This gives him a few abilities. First off, if he meets a parallel world version of himself and dies, he can pass on his consciousness to the new Valentine, effectively making him immortal as long as he can pass on his consciousness. Another ability is when two parallel objects or people meet. When in contact with each other, a instantaneous explosion will occur, obliterating both objects, as two of the same things cannot coexist within a single individual universe. With the third being that whatever objects that Valentine folded into to enter the parallel universe becomes now a portal for anybody to enter, so an advantage or disadvantage depending on how you see it. So Valentine is coming into this fight with a lot, with near equalized stats giving him a bit of an advantage here, with higher end scaling implying that Diego with the world might be similar to Valentine with D4C Love Train, who is then similar to Dio with his world. So with this Valentine in mind being the last obstacle, quote unquote, how does Team Polnareff fare? I'm gonna be honest, while I think there is a win con for this team to beat Funny Valentine with D4C Love Train. The reality of it is, I don't think it's very possible because there's just too much going on here. Valentine can pull more versions of himself from different parallel worlds in order to kind of help out with the numbers game here. Simultaneously, on top of that, this team does not have a reliable way to get around Love Train or effectively kill him in one shot unless a very well coordinated plan is used in order to defeat Funny Valentine. And the only way that works is if he leaves the light barrier, which he needs to in order to attack. However, though, that's easier said than done. We also have to deal with instant annihilation if other versions of Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy show up. On top of that, they're all very close range stand users, maybe with some mid-range abilities, which makes this fight even harder. The only way this team wins is if Iggy plays decoy with multiple versions of Avdol and Polnareff as sand clones, allowing either Polnareff or Avdol to either deal with the other Funny Valentines without stand abilities to then distract the main body while he is outside the light barrier, effectively ending him in one shot so he doesn't pass on to another one, and or get Lucy out of the equation. We never saw that, but that's also a possibility as well. Other than that, there's really not much this team can do. It is really just being out-haxed by just a superior stand. So I would say Team Polnareff just falls short under beating all of Steel Ball Run. But how does Team Jotaro fare? Time stop's a bitch. That's how I'm starting off this section. The reality of it is Team Polnareff has to try a lot harder in all of these encounters because their hacks aren't that crazy aside from maybe Avdol and Iggy, depending on how you want to look at it. But in comparison to Jotaro with fucking time stop, this fight is infinitely more trivial for this group because once D4C comes outside the light barrier, what is stopping Jotaro from time stopping and then just obliterating D4C in the face? Even if I were to highball this in Funny Valentine's favor, the fastest you can make this character is just a subpar the world. Low ball or high ball, Star Platinum is catching his ass. And God forbid Joseph die just to make Jotaro's anger exponentially grow his base power. Oh, did I forget to mention the 20-meter Emerald Splash? While I will say that I do think in a 1v1 encounter, D4C Love Train has a lot of hacks and abilities that just overcome a vast majority of JoJo characters. In a team-based scenario like this, a lot of the hacks are kind of off-put to some of the other characters, allowing somebody like Jotaro to really shine. And while I will say that Funny Valentine does have the win con of redeflecting damage onto his friends, he would have to do that 3 times and somehow still get around time stop, which is harder done than said. Now going back to the question, could Team Jotaro beat all of Steel Ball Run? I think the answer would be yes. And like I promised, what about the whole group versus D4C Love Train? The funny thing here is though, I think I've already kind of answered this question. Team Jotaro was able to do it pretty well and confidently. You add Polnareff, Avdol, and Iggy on top of that, all highballed on both sides, and it's kind of obvious who wins. It's the Stardust Crusaders. It's the Joestar group. Why? Because they're all overpowered. They're all freaks of nature when it comes to the world of stand users. Even Dio didn't even mess with 4 of them at a time. Imagine all 6, with one of them having one of the best abilities in the entire franchise. At this point, I'm gonna say it's unfair for Funny Valentine to fight the entire Stardust Crusaders group in one go. So to answer the question, how far do the Stardust Crusaders make it in Steel Ball Run? They make it pretty easily. Not only that, but they absolutely crush it. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video. Follow over on my Patreon if you want to consider supporting me and the channel. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.